So what's NaNoRenO? Ask anyone who's done it before, and they'll say it's something like, yeah, that seems about right. NaNoRenO is an annual visual novel game jam where from the beginning of March up until usually a couple days into April, solo devs and teams will try to finish an entire visual novel, but not everyone makes it through. For a lot of devs, this might be their first time making a visual novel from start to finish, and depending on how badly the experience goes, it might be their last. So for first-time devs or veterans who could use a few new tricks, this video will show you strategies that will guarantee you'll live to nano another Reno. Let's imagine two NaNoRenO teams, Team Pinata and Team Telescope. Team Pinata is a group of enthusiastic, mostly new devs. Their strategy, metaphorically speaking, is to put on blindfolds and swing wildly, bless their heart. Team Telescope, on the other hand, is a group of mostly NaNoRenO veterans. It's very likely that they've previously gone through all the things Team Pinata will this year. But now, they're experienced, they've learned their lessons, and they've never been more prepared for a game jam. Their strategy will revolve around looking ahead and adjusting their actions accordingly. So let's look at how Team Telescope and Team Pinata both tackle NaNoRenO. The future members of Team Pinata are still deliberating whether or not they want to join NaNoRenO this year, while on the other hand, Team Periscope has just been formed. In February, members of Team Periscope found each other through a few different means. A few may have made posts on Lemonsoft, Reddit, or at the DevTalk Discord, where they also attended one of the NaNoRenO meet and greets. One or two of the members may have worked together before, and they're just excited to collaborate again. Team Telescope wants to make sure that they have a member on their team for everything they want to accomplish. At the very least, a programmer and a writer. Ideally, they'll have an artist and sound engineer too, and if they have some experience, they might even want a voice director and voice actors. Yeah, if you haven't made a game before, NaNoRenO is not the time to experiment with voice acting. There's a lot more planning and scheduling than you think there's going to be, and honestly, when you throw in a few hundred extra sound assets into a game, you're just multiplying the odds of there being some sort of bug you're going to have to fix in the last few days before the end of the jam. And if you do have experience, you are more than well aware of the advantages of having a voice director versus not having one. Wrangling voice talent, making sure that everyone sounds like they fit together, like that's a way more involved job than a lot of people think it is. But if you don't have an experienced voice director, if you have a voice actor who's just kind of interested in trying out the role, NaNoRenO's not the worst place for them to start out, but just tread carefully. But for now, let's imagine Team Periscope is a very modest group of 4 devs. A programmer, a character artist, a background artist, and a writer. The writer knows how to do some basic audio stuff, so they volunteered to also be the sound engineer, and the character artist will also tackle UI design. But Team Periscope also knows there are 2 more roles that are essential for success: creative lead and production manager. A lot of artists tend to get pretty focused on their specific job, and unless you make an active habit of keeping an eye on each other, it's easy to suddenly realize none of your individual efforts add to a cohesive whole. A creative lead's job is to know what the team wants creatively for a project, and make sure everyone works together towards that goal. Likewise, a production manager's job is to keep track of what everyone's working on, make sure they regularly deliver to the next artist in the pipeline, and update people's schedules based on where the project is at. Now, these might seem like the bosses of the project, but that's because in traditional hierarchical company structure, they usually are. But in an egalitarian creative collective, these are administrative jobs that make sure that the project goes smoothly and everyone can focus on what's important. In Team Telescope, the background artist has volunteered to be the creative lead, and the writer has also decided to be the production manager. That's a lot of hats. Now, if you're a solo dev, you might be saying, well, none of this team stuff applies to me, but it kind of does, because when you don't have a member of your team to take on each one of those individual roles, you need to take on all of those roles. And it's really important to recognize that those, lesser sung roles in the creative development of creative lead and production manager, those are still roles that you need to do on your own. That means taking the time every day to just sit down for a few minutes, look at your schedule, look at where you're at, look at where you need to be, and adjusting your actions accordingly. So you need to be your own production manager. Team Pinata is still not formed, but each of their members has been imagining what kind of visual novel they would want to work on if they did decide to do NaNoRenO this year. Team Periscope, on the other hand, is starting with a very basic question for each of their team members. What is a reasonable and achievable productive output you can make during this jam? If you've ever had a really productive month, like drawing, writing, programming, it's easy to lie to yourself and say that like, oh yeah, I can match that output again. But what if you're having an off month? What if the project ended up being like a little bit more complicated than you thought it would be? What if something unexpected happens? Instead, try to think of what you can reasonably accomplish in about 3 weeks and set that as your goal for NaNoRenO. Once the whole team says what they can reasonably accomplish in 3 weeks, they take stock. The writer can do about 20,000 words. The character artist can do 4 characters with maybe 6 expressions each, and the background artist can manage 7 backgrounds. From there, Team Telescope can finally brainstorm with those stats in mind. This way, they don't commit to a project they can't ultimately produce. Like, maybe a big ensemble visual novel isn't feasible, but with 7 backgrounds, they can make a narrative that involves a lot of different locations. With the extra 1 to 2 weeks before the jam, Team Telescope brainstorms a VN, writes a plot outline, gets together all the reference materials, makes rough sketches of the characters, and sets up an internal production schedule. NaNoRenO explicitly allows you to do some pre-production work, just nothing that leads to final assets. And there's no NaNoRenO lawyers that are going to argue over the exact definition of what that means, but try to keep to the spirit of the thing. You can have a really strong idea of what you're going to do. Just don't start a written draft, and definitely don't start any sketches that are going to immediately go on to final. Just try to keep it loose. Team Pinata has finally formed together. Just like Team Telescope, they also have a programmer, background artist, character artist, and writer. They're brainstorming an idea, and once they have an idea they can all settle on, they'll immediately get to work. But after 4 days on the rough draft, the writer of Team Pinata has noticed some glaring plot holes with a roughly brainstormed idea they cobbled together. And it's kind of a big one. It can only be fixed with some pretty major story revisions. And since they all only met at the beginning of the jam, the writer is a little afraid of being seen as the person who ruined this project. So they run the plot hole issues past one member of the group, who then checks with another member, and they play this weird game of telephone for a day or two until they finally have a team meeting. At the team meeting, they come up with a solution they can agree on, but it involves scrapping the main character design the artist already finished this week. The writer will find a way to reuse the character later, but it's a pretty demoralizing and stressful first week for Team Pinata. Now, I'm not saying if you only get started the first week of NaNoRenO without any pre-production that you're gonna fail. I'm just saying, like, there's a possibility you could need a little bit more time to get going. If you keep your goals modest and keep working at it, you'll get through NaNoRenO, trust me. On the other hand, this will be Team Telescope's best week. The production manager / writer already put together the schedule and has the entire team using Trello. Trello is a project planning program that lets you set tasks with deadlines as cards, and as you finish them, you move them further along the production pipeline. If at any point there's a problem with something that was delivered, it can be moved back. This program is great for letting individual team members know what they should be working on, and gives the project manager a great bird's eye view of where the project's at. This first week, the Trello is going to be very clean looking. Everyone on the team knows what they should be working on, and they can just enjoy the work. This has been a really good week for the members of Team Pinata. Now that they've finally solved their big plot hole issues, production is chugging away. The character artist has finished 2 sprites with full expression sets, the background artist finished the 3rd background, the writers finished their first draft, and the programmer hasn't been given any assets, so they've just been chilling out. Team Telescope, on the other hand, has some problems. Their background artist has only finished 2 backgrounds so far. They look amazing, but they're at day 10 out of 30. So at that pace, they'll only have 5 backgrounds by the time the programmer needs all final assets. The background artist has been insisting they can hurry up on the rest of the backgrounds, but the project managers decided to call a team meeting. The artist is a little embarrassed, but they shouldn't be. Production slowdowns happen all the time, and the sooner you can spot the issue, the quicker you can fix it. The project manager proposes cutting 2 locations, and is ready to write them out, because, it's the writer too. But the team discusses it, and they figure that they can simply make a few of the locations simpler to render. The character artist and background artist sketch out some possibilities, and as creatively, the background artist feels comfortable making them that way. After the hour-long meeting, they compromise. 1 location gets cut, and 3 backgrounds will be rendered with simpler layouts. This sort of thing happens with every production on a schedule. It's hard to tell when something's going to come together quick or if it's going to need a little bit more time, but it's always worth reassessing whenever your production estimates aren't matching your actual output. The best feeling is when you're ahead of schedule and you have just a little bit more time just to throw in some extra little polish or just stuff you didn't think you'd have time to put in. Although now that I'm saying that aloud, that sounds kind of like a dad thing. Like, kids, production management's actually pretty cool. Programmer of Team Pinata is in a panic. The writer and artists have finally been sending them assets, but it's a little overwhelming. The character sprites have been sent, but they're not aligned right. Backgrounds need to be resized, and the 20,000 words that the writer put together weren't properly broken up for integration. So the programmer took it upon themselves to parse through all that text, separating it into reasonable chunks for a good 10,000 words before they even thought to complain to everyone else. And then when they brought it up and they asked, oh, also, when am I getting the UI? The rest of the team said they assumed the programmer was doing it. Long story short, to keep the programmer from leaving the team entirely, the character artist volunteered to stop production on sprites and pivot to learning and implementing UI design. In comparison, the artists and writer at Team Telescope have been delivering the programmer assets as they've been completing them. They also had some character asset alignment issues, and the writer didn't break up the text properly for engine integration, but these problems were spotted early in week 2, and so this week, integration has been going much smoother. And a minor disaster was averted this week too. The character artists of Team Telescope, who volunteered to do UI, realized it was a bit more complicated than they thought it would be, and let the project manager know as soon as possible. The project manager had a quick talk with the creative lead, and they decided to find a UI asset pack that they could get for their game engine, and asked if the character artist would be willing to make some minor modifications to it. They said yes, and this kept the character artist on schedule for week 3. This is crunch week for Team Pinata. After the shakeup last week, the programmer has been pulling extra hours to finish plugging in the content. The character artist turned UI artist has been struggling to build something usable, and the writer has been trying their very best to keep the revisions to a minimum. But back at Team Telescope, they're still on schedule. Final assets are mostly in, and the programmer has been focusing on bug fixes and polish. The writer has been focused on their job as project manager and is coordinating with the team to finish any stray tasks left on Trello. The background and character artists are finishing their last few items, and they've even started discussing how they want to set up the itch.io story page, and which assets they want to show off, because they're ready for... Past the deadline. Team Pinata really tried, but they still had outstanding art assets. The game keeps crashing, and even if it worked, there was so much the writer still wanted to change, they would have felt a little embarrassed releasing it anyway. But Team Telescope? They posted their finished game yesterday. They talked about adding some polish with the extra day, but they decided they'd rather play some of the other NaNoRenO VNs that finished early. After a frustrating night's sleep, the writer of Team Pinata decided to make a post on Reddit about the game they couldn't finish. They showed off some art, gave the plot outline, but then they mostly talked about what went wrong and what they'd do better next time, if there was a next time. But the creative lead of Team Telescope saw the post and wrote, "Hey, this looks great. You should finish up the game. It sounds like you just need a few extra days to do it." That comment is all the writer needed to hear to get the team back together. NaNoRenO's done, but guess what? They want to finish this thing anyway. The important thing is, if you were working all through NaNoRenO, whether or not you managed to finish in that period of time, if you do all that and you're able to come back in a few days and just get right back to work again making visual novels, well, guess what? You survived! And all it took was a nice comment from somebody, a little validation. That can make the difference between a debilitating experience and an affirming, fulfilling one. So what have we learned? The most important strategy on surviving NaNoRenO actually came from Team Pinata. Don't give up. There are a lot of projects that will fizzle away after they hit production problems, or if there's infighting within the team, or if you don't meet your deadline. But honestly, any project that gets finished eventually is a success, and you should be proud of yourself. But let's go over 3 big takeaways from Team Telescope. Pre-production is essential. Before NaNoRenO even starts, take the time to create a team, figure out what you're capable of doing, what you want to do together, and hammer out any potential problems early on. Keep track of your progress. Your schedule is your guide. Be sure to check your progress against it frequently, and if you're going faster or slower than expected, make changes accordingly before it results in wasted time. And finally, support the community. When you're finished with your game, don't just disappear. Take the time to see what everyone else has made and be supportive. And that last point's really an important one because we don't want to just survive NaNoRenO, we want the whole community to thrive. And NaNoRenO is a really good way to bring us all together. So even if you're not making a game this year, you can still participate in NaNoRenO by trying out some new games you otherwise wouldn't have. Rate and comment some visual novels that look interesting that you think more people should see. And just send some love to anybody you think might need it. But if you are interested in participating and you want to learn a free and easy visual novel engine, I have a whole series of videos that'll show you how you can make your own game in RenPy. Or if you're a veteran developer and you just want to give your games a little extra spice, check out my RenPy cookbook series right over here. And if you have any tips or strategies for NaNoRenO, be sure to leave them in the comments. I'd love to see them. And of course, as always, if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for sticking around, and best of luck at NaNoRenO.